So Prime Minister Mark Carney tabled his first federal budget, and it's the boldest economic play we've seen in a generation.
But critics are already shouting about a $78.3 billion deficit.
But they're missing the headline. This isn't a splurge. It's a $141 billion counterpunch to U.S. tariffs and years of stagnation.
So pick your future, Canada: anemic growth or real investment in manufacturing, defense, and clean energy.
Carney and Champagne picked growth, jobs, and sovereignty.
This is Canada Strong, and we're going to show you why this bet makes sense and why the doomers have it all wrong.
What is in this budget that's turning heads?
Well, here's what the budget actually does, minus all that jargon. Over the next 5 years, Ottawa's putting about $280 billion on the table. Yes, billion with a B. It sounds like monopoly money, but this time it's aimed at things Canadians can actually see and touch.
All right, here's the gist of it. Most of it goes to making sure that the country can stand on its own 2 feet. Around 40% is about protecting Canada, defense, cybersecurity, keeping supply chains working when the world loses its mind. Roughly another third tackles the cost of living, helping with housing, taxes, and energy bills so people can actually breathe again. And the rest? Well, that's the human side. Programs, benefits, jobs, and training for Canadians trying to stay ahead.
That's a lot to break down, and we have a PDF attached in the description below if you want to check it out yourself. But really, it's like 3 buckets: protection, affordability, and opportunity. But they all pour into the same idea: a stronger, more independent Canada.
Included in this budget are things that they've already announced, like scrapping the consumer carbon price, which knocks about 18 cents off of every liter of gas, and giving middle-class families a break worth up to $840 a year if both parents are working.
And they're firing up a new agency called Build Canada Homes to actually get houses built instead of just talking about it. They're putting extra money into job training, youth employment, which is definitely needed, and clean energy projects to go with it.
And while that's all rolling out, they're promising to keep the books in check. Canada still has the lowest debt to GDP in the G7, sitting around 13%, which gives us room to invest without sinking the ship.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, sure, but context matters, and Canada's been here before, just under very different circumstances.
You're right, Deb. Big spending isn't new here. What's new is why we're doing it. The last time Ottawa opened up the taps like this, it was to dig the country out of the Great Recession. So that brings us to an important comparison. Really, the Conservatives don't have a leg to stand on when we talk about big deficits.
Totally. They keep saying that this year's budget is massive. But let's put that into perspective. Back in 2010, Stephen Harper ran a $55 billion deficit to fight the Great Recession. And hey, Poilievre was in Parliament then, and he voted for it. So what's the problem now? Because when you adjust that number for inflation, you're looking at roughly $77 billion in today's money.
So yeah, similar size, right? But the difference is that Harper was spending to restart a stalled economy. This budget is spending to armor ours.
Canada's now dealing with tariffs, supply chain chaos, and a global trade war, not just a temporary downturn. Over 75% of this year's budget is about responding to those international shocks.
And 42% goes towards sovereignty and defense, hitting NATO's 2% this year for the first time ever, and building up Canadian industry so we're not at the mercy of other countries, namely the US.
Another 36% tackles affordability. That's tax cuts, cheaper gas, and the biggest housing plan in a generation. They're promising to nearly double home construction with that new Build Canada Homes agency.
Harper's budget poured money into highways and stimulus projects to get people working again. This one's pouring money into ports, power grids, housing, and defense to keep Canada working independently.
The government says by 2028 they'll balance day-to-day operations and only borrow for long-term investments. In plain English, Harper spent to jumpstart the engine, Carney spending to bulletproof it.
And that's the real difference. One was recovery spending, the other is resilience spending. Whether it works or not, That's going to depend on how fast they can actually build what they've promised.
And if there's one place that resilience is being tested, it's housing.
Yep, because for most Canadians, the economy isn't a spreadsheet, it's whether they can afford a home.
Which is why the government is betting big on this new Build Canada Homes plan.
So let's break down what they're actually promising to build and how fast they think they can do it.
And this is where it gets interesting. The new agency isn't just another shiny announcement. It's designed to speed up construction and pull private builders into the mix.
The goal is huge. Nearly double the number of homes built each year, from around 280,000 to almost 500,000.
And they're cutting GST for first-time buyers on homes under $1 million. Man, I wish I had that when we bought our first place. But I'm happy for the people that are buying today.
They also want to build faster and greener using prefab and modular construction to cut timelines in half and emissions by about 20%.
Now, I know what you're thinking. People hear prefab and they think cheap boxes or fewer jobs for trades. But that's not exactly what it is. Prefab just means building smarter, doing part of the work indoors where the weather doesn't stop the clock. And electricians, plumbers, and finishers, they still handle the skilled work once it's on site.
And that's where the savings comes from. Less waste, fewer delays, and homes that go up in months instead of years.
It's also a boost for small contractors. Instead of just a handful of mega developers sitting on everything, regional builders can jump in, assemble, finish, and move on to the next project.
So it's not cutting jobs, it's shifting them. More manufacturing, more logistics, and still plenty of work on the ground.
The big payoff is supply. You build more homes and you finally cool prices without punishing people who already own.
Which brings us to the other half of this. Who's buying? We see it in our own neighborhood around here. Big houses bought by offshore investors sitting empty and flippers driving up the prices on the ones that regular people need.
That's what the government's trying to clamp down on. There's 3 main levers.
First, the foreign buyer ban stays. If you're not living or working here long term, you don't get to park your cash in a house that Canadians need.
Second, the anti-flipping rule. If you buy and sell inside a year, your profit's taxed as business income, not a capital gain. And that wipes out those quick and easy flips.
And third, the empty home taxes keep pressure on investors. The federal underused housing tax and local vacancy taxes mean that if you leave a place empty, it's going to cost you. Live in it, rent it, or sell it.
So will that actually help people trying to buy or rent?
Well, it helps people on both fronts. More empty homes come back into the rental market, rents level out, and the flipping game gets harder. First-time buyers have a fighting chance again.
And when the prefab speeds up new construction, you can get more options. Townhomes, mid-market builds, purpose-built rentals. You're not just looking for these overpriced glass towers.
It's not a miracle fix, but it's a movement. And for Canadians who've been stuck waiting for something to change, that finally counts for something.
The other big piece of this budget isn't getting nearly enough attention. The jobs. Everyone's talking about what's being cut, but not what's being created.
You said it, Deb. For every department getting trimmed, there's a new sector gearing up. This budget isn't just about defense and infrastructure. It's about building a new generation of Canadian work.
Take national defense, for example. Canada's finally hitting NATO's 2% spending target 5 years ahead of schedule. But this isn't just about jets and ships, it's about the people behind them.
There's funding for 1,000 new RCMP officers, another 1,000 border guards, and an entire financial crimes agency to chase down the money laundering and online fraud. That's jobs in law enforcement, cybersecurity, and tech. Not exactly government bloat.
And on top of that, they're funding Arctic and maritime surveillance, satellite monitoring, and cyber defense infrastructure. The kind of modern systems that protect data, borders, and trade routes.
Which means high-skilled work. Engineers, technicians, coders, shipbuilders, even aerospace specialists. These are jobs that stay in Canada because they have to be in Canada.
And it's not just the government side. Every one of these projects pulls in private investment. Companies building parts, providing software, manufacturing equipment. You can't modernize national security without Canadian suppliers.
The defense and clean tech sectors are where the next wave of Canadian jobs are coming from. There's already investment flooding in from Europe, from the US, from Asia. Why? Because these countries want reliable partners who aren't caught in trade wars.
So yes, Ottawa's trimming its waistline, but the real story is that it's creating better jobs, not just more of them. This is about welding, coding, designing, building, protecting. It's not about just pushing paper.
For once, defense spending is about protecting Canada, not proving loyalty to anyone else. It's about Canadians doing the work that keeps the country safe and the economy strong.
And to pay for everything we just talked about, Ottawa's trimming its own waistline. The budget cuts about $60 billion over 5 years through what they call right-sizing.
That's government speak for running leaner, fewer layers of management, fewer duplicate programs, and using digital systems instead of shuffling paper.
They're basically freezing the size of the public service so it only grows with the population, not with political cycles.
And they're using new tech, AI tools, automation, online processing to get the same work done faster. It's like modernizing an old factory without laying off the workers who actually keep it running.
That brings spending growth down from roughly 8% a year to under 1%. That's the kind of restraint that's rare in Ottawa.
And here's the key part. Those savings don't come out of social programs. Childcare, dental, old age security, and disability benefits, they're all protected.
So it's not about cutting help for people, it's about cutting waste. Trim the bureaucracy, keep the benefits. Now that's a motto I can live by.
Well, we'll know soon enough where public opinion lands. But for now, the story is simple. The budget's out, the lines are drawn, and Parliament's about to decide if Canada keeps moving forward or heads back to the ballot box.
So where does that leave Poilievre? Because his party's reeling from the defection, and there's a lot of hostility going on behind the scenes. Aaron Gunn calls it cowardice, Andrew Scheer labels it betrayal. Others sigh when the reporters ask for a comment. That's not unity, it's fracture.
And then there was Poilievre's knee-jerk reaction. Before even going through the budget, he said, "We will not support it." And he zeroed in on scrapping the industrial carbon tax. Okay, he's fixated on the carbon tax. But experts say that that tax is Canada's most powerful tool to cut emissions and protect export markets. Turn it off, and we lose jobs and competitiveness.
And it doesn't help the little guy either. It helps the biggest emitters. Your gas bill? Same. Your groceries? Same. The only people who get an instant break are the smokestacks.
And then Europe slaps a carbon tariff on our exports anyway. So instead of keeping that money in Canada to modernize our plants, we just hand it to Brussels at the border. Genius idea, dude.
So short term, you'll get a few corporations that save on compliance. Long term, we bleed jobs when investment stalls and our exports get dinged. It's a sugar high with a brutal crash.
If you actually want to help workers, you keep a stable industrial price here, recycle the revenue here, and pair it with tax credits so steel, cement, and battery plants upgrade here, not in Ohio or Germany.
So yeah, cutting the industrial price sounds like a win with his usual slogans, until you realize that it does nothing for families and hands our leverage to other countries.
And then he pledged to cut waste, build homes, and cut spending, which is bizarre because every one of those buckets is already in the Liberal budget. It's kind of like handing in last year's homework and acting like you invented the assignment.
Meanwhile, the only grown-ups in the room now are the NDPs. They said they'll review the budget, consult, and then vote in a united way. Wow, maturity. What a concept.
Well, you can call it boring if you want. But if you want a government that actually works instead of shouting the loudest, that's the kind of approach people remember.
So this budget marks a shift from complaining about problems to actually building solutions.
After a year of chaos south of the border and infighting at home, Canadians finally see a plan that sounds like a country with a future.
It's not flashy, it's not ideological, it's pragmatic. And that might just be why this is going to work.
Poilievre keeps talking about anger, but Carney's talking about infrastructure. Guess which one builds something real?
So what do you think, Canada? Is this the start of a new Canadian comeback?
Or just a temporary bump before the next political meltdown?
Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with some more Canadians so they can see what's actually going on beyond the headlines. So we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place.
And if you want to help support this channel, become a part of the A-Team or subscribe to our Substack. The links are down below.